2003, for the first time in NATO's history, the organization took charge of a mission outside the North Atlantic area in Afghanistan. In December 2014, 11 years later, that mission, the ISAF mission, came to an end. Would it be fair to describe that NATO mission in Afghanistan, 5 years of which was on your watch as Secretary General, would it be fair to describe that mission as a complete and utter failure?
No, that wouldn't be fair. Actually, we achieved our goal. We came to Afghanistan in the first place to prevent the country from once again becoming a safe haven for terrorists, and we achieved that goal.
Partly because you gave them other safe havens like Iraq and Libya.
I think we have to face the reality that international terrorism spreads across borders, and it will be a very, very long-term effort to fight international terrorism.
If we look at the record in Afghanistan under the NATO years, suicide bombings up, civilian casualties up, heroin production up, the Taliban resurgent, Al-Qaeda still in existence. How is that not a failure?
Again, let's be very open about it. There are many problems in Afghanistan. But Afghanistan today is a much better society than it was when we started our operation. If you take the educational system, 8 million children go to school now, out of which a third are girls. Previously they couldn't get an education. Health system has improved. Life expectancy has gone up. Child mortality has gone down.
Civilian casualties from violence are up. Suicide bombings are up.
There are problems when it comes to security.
Those are not problems, those go to the very fundamental heart of the conflict.
We have built a very strong Afghan security force, around 350,000 Afghan soldiers and police. So we have done our job, now the Afghans must do their job.
In general, the US-led NATO mission, in terms of bringing security, has not been successful. Do you know who said that?
I don't know, but we have achieved our goal.
As the president of Afghanistan, Hamid Karzai, said that.
Yeah, he said many things.
Let me rephrase. The Western-backed president of Afghanistan, Hamid Karzai, said it has not been a successful operation. Yeah. That's a pretty damning indictment from a president who the West supported and helped install in power originally, saying NATO failed.
I met President Karzai on many occasions, but I also met Afghans in the street, and I can assure you that they appreciate all we have done.
That's a very sweeping statement. I think a lot of Afghans don't appreciate what you've done. A lot of the Afghans who were killed by NATO forces, bombed at weddings, tortured at Bagram.
Of course, you will be able to find Afghans that didn't want our presence, but a huge majority of Afghans appreciate what we did. And now they are in charge of security.
You failed to defeat the Taliban, which was one of your core goals.
There will still be security challenges in Afghanistan.
More than a security challenge, that's a failed goal. You go in to defeat the Taliban and you leave with the Taliban resurgent.
Our goal was to prevent Afghanistan from once again being a safe haven for terrorists.
That wasn't your only goal. That wasn't your only. You said
our goal.
This is what you said in 2010. Defeat is not an option. We will win. The Taliban will never win. How's that working out?
They didn't win. They didn't win.
Did you win?
Did
you win?
We achieved our goal.
Did you win? It's your quote. We will win. I'm asking the question. Did you win?
Yeah. In that respect. In that respect, we won. Yes, we
in the
achieved.
Respect of defeating the Taliban, you won.
We achieved our goal.
Okay.
But the Taliban is still there. And that's why we built a very strong Afghan security force of 350,000 soldiers and police. And now they are in charge of security, and they are doing a great job.
I'm sure many would dispute that. Isn't the lesson of Afghanistan that there are certain parts of the world in which Western militaries, and of course NATO is the preeminent Western military alliance, should just stay out of, should stay away from, because they're seen as invaders, as a colonial force?
The international community had to react after 9/11. The terrorist attacks against the United States were rooted in Afghanistan, and obviously we had to react.
You didn't have to stay there for 14 years, though, because of 9/11.
No, it's a long time, and seen retrospectively, I would also say that one of the lessons learned is that we should start training and education of local security forces much earlier than we did. We didn't start in earnest until 2009. We should have started earlier.
Richard Sakwa, Professor of Russian and European politics here in the UK. Is it that the NATO forces were seen as liberators, or that they were seen as invaders and occupiers? Was there a historical context to any of this?
Well, indeed. Once again, a huge strategic blindness, if you like, going all the way back when the West was supporting the Mujahideen. And this is a monster created in the West and which is still there. And indeed, even British intervention, I give all respect to the British soldiers who served in Helmand, it was strategically madness to a place precisely which the British had been in the 19th century, as if they'd come back for revenge.
Ian Bond, you're a former British diplomat. You've worked at NATO HQ. Let me ask you the same question I asked Anders. Did NATO win in Afghanistan, in your view?
There was a peaceful transition from Hamid Karzai to Ashraf Ghani, and that's a victory.
That's a victory. But did NATO win the war in Afghanistan that it set out to fight? We can all find victories of some sorts in any conflict.
Well, I don't know how else I would define a victory.
Defeating the Taliban? That was one of the goals that Bush and Blair set out in 2001?
Well, defeating the Taliban in the sense that the Taliban were not able to prevent a democratic election in Afghanistan and a peaceful transition of power. And that was not something that Afghanistan had had in an extremely long time. So I would count that as a victory. Is it a total victory? No, it certainly isn't.
Do you think damage has been done to NATO's reputation as this all-powerful Western military alliance, unable to quote-unquote defeat a bunch of quote-unquote mujahideen in Afghanistan?
Well, if anybody thought that NATO was an all-powerful fighting force, then yes, but then, that's a pretty mistaken perception. If you look at the numbers of troops that NATO had in the field, even when we had more than 100,000, for a country the size of Afghanistan, with the population of Afghanistan, that was actually a very small number. If you look at the number of British troops that were trying to control a territory the size of Helmand, it's extraordinary that they achieved anything at all.
Let me put that question to the man sitting next to you. Alexander Nekrasov is a former Kremlin advisor. You guys, the Russians, put in a whole load of troops into Afghanistan in the 80s. How did that work out?
Well, it didn't work out because obviously they were supported, the Mujahideen was supported by the Americans, by the West. There was a flow of weapons coming in, but at least the Soviet Union did try to build something there, and it left something there. NATO left nothing but huge crops of...
Oh, come on. The Russians killed more Afghans than NATO did in Afghanistan
well, they
in the 80s.
didn't actually. These statistics prove nothing because the biggest problem Afghanistan had was that the Taliban was running Afghanistan even when NATO troops were still there. Now, what I find remarkable is that how on earth all these NATO troops couldn't stop the poppy production. And now Afghanistan provides 94% of heroin in the world. So how did that happen? Nobody knows. So I think it was a total disaster. I think Afghanistan is again a crisis zone. I think all these figures with girls going to school will come down to zero soon because the Taliban are coming back. That's the problem.
Are the Taliban coming back in your view?
No, there will still be Taliban there, but the fact is that they don't have the strength to actually, as Ian Bond stressed, prevent elections from going forward. The way the elections in Afghanistan was conducted was actually a great success, and also a tribute to the Afghan security forces.
Okay, let's go to our audience. Gentleman here in the front row.
Hi, my name is Olof. I'm from Amnesty International. We recently released a report that looked specifically at civilian casualties in Afghanistan by NATO forces and found pretty compelling evidence that a lot of these amounted to war crimes. My question to you is, do you think NATO is doing enough to push its member states to ensure justice for what is illegal killings of civilians?
Absolutely, we have a clear focus on that. But let me emphasize that according to United Nations statistics, the number of civilian casualties caused by NATO or ISAF operations has drastically declined over the years. And furthermore, the huge majority of civilian casualties are caused by the Taliban.
That doesn't quite deal with this question, though. Regardless of who's killing more, If NATO has committed war crimes, are those NATO commanders being held to account?
Yeah, but I have no examples of such alleged war
Maybe you
crimes.
should read their report.
But if there is evidence, that will of course be addressed according to our rules.
Have you read the Amnesty report on NATO, on accusing NATO of war crimes in Afghanistan?
No, I haven't read the report, but of course I have heard a lot of allegations.
You don't agree with them?
I can only say that if there is clear evidence of abuse or violations of international rules or human rights, then it will be dealt with properly.
Okay, let's go to the back of the hall. Let's go right to the back.
Hello. I was recently in Crimea. You put a lot of weight on people being able to choose themselves. Everyone I spoke to said they were very, very happy to be what they called reunified with Russia. I think we've got a problem in not understanding that actually they want to be part of Russia. It was not an invasion. This is a complete fabrication. And I think a big step forward would be if you, NATO, would accept that Crimea made a decision rather than punishing Russia for it.
Well, I think if that's the case, the whole issue should be dealt with according to the Ukrainian constitution, according to international law, and not by grabbing land by force.
Okay, let's go back to the audience. Let's go to the gentleman here in the second row.
The situation now is that we have nuclear powers facing up to each other like they used to. It's very serious. And my question to you is NATO's policy, which is a very aggressive and provocative and expansionist policy in Europe, where is that leading us to a peaceful future?
Our core task is to protect our allies against attack, and the best way to ensure peace is to strengthen our collective defense so that it's also a credible deterrence. So to deter attacks, that's the best way to ensure peace.
Can I just ask a question to Alexander Nekrasov on that very subject? I'm reminded of a recent interview Vladimir Putin did in which he said he actually admitted that he had nuclear weapons on standby at the start of this crisis. That's a deeply irresponsible thing to say, isn't it?
No. He was saying that there was a moment when the Kremlin was so nervous that they were thinking that they might have to do it, but they didn't do it. So I don't really, understand why there's so much fuss about this.
When you hear about these reports and you hear these questions, there's fuss because they're nuclear weapons, Alexander. Do you think we're closer, God forbid, to a nuclear war now than we have been at any stage since the end of the Cold War?
No, in reality I don't think so. But of course we are all concerned by these strange statements from political leaders in Russia. And let me emphasize that since the end of the Cold War, NATO nuclear powers have reduced the number of nuclear weapons drastically, while we haven't seen the same on the Russian side.
Coming up on Head to Head.
I would say NATO is